Well, it appeared that all just sort of came together. As you say, Willie Nelson had always been a Sinatra aficionado, and in all of the decades of glory, hardship, disappointment, and hanging on by his fingernails, music was the only thing that ever remained steady. Willie did have a secret, however, that gnawed at him every day for decades. When his close friend and fellow highwayman Kris Kristofferson passed on, Willie finally acknowledged what he had held inside. Kris wasn't merely his friend or bandmate. He was the reason Willie made it through his most troubled years. But there was something more heartbreaking. Willie waited until Kris was dead before he could finally utter it aloud. In his own words, he admitted that he despised himself for never having told Kris the truth during his lifetime. What Willie would come to share about those desperate nights and the songs that had salvaged him would shatter hearts across the world. There are some secrets too heavy to be borne alone, and for Willie Nelson, the burden of secrecy became too much. If this kind of story touches your heart, if you're someone who cares about truth, responsibility, and speaking up for the voiceless, please like this video, subscribe to our channel Spark Science, and share it with someone who should hear it. Let's get started. Willie Hugh Nelson was born on April 29, 1933, in Abbott, Texas, a town so tiny it counted only about 300 folks at the time. It was the depth of the Great Depression, the worst economic calamity in American history. 1 in 4 Americans was out of work. Poverty and hunger and despair blanketed the land. Right in the middle of this conflict, tragedy befell Willie before he was old enough to know. His mother departed when he was only 6 months old. She departed to seek employment and did not return, not even once. Shortly afterwards, his father also departed, leaving him and his sister, Bobby. Without parents to care for them, the two kids were taken in by their grandparents, Alfred and Nancy. Nancy taught piano, and Alfred was a blacksmith. They just managed to get by. In Texas, winters were brutally cold, and they even had to use old newspapers stuck to the walls of their home just to keep out the freezing wind. That was Willie's world when he was growing up: hunger, heartache, and abandonment before he even knew how to say the word. By the time he was 7, Willie was already picking cotton in the hot Texas sun after school to earn money for food. That same year, he almost did not survive. In 1940, pneumonia swept across the country and claimed the lives of thousands of children. Willie picked it up, and despite doctors of that time having very little medicine that functioned, he somehow managed to survive. That illness deposited a ruggedness in him, an impression of resilience that would stay with him through the worst pages of his existence. A year before, at 6 years old, something took place that transfigured everything. His grandfather Alfred gave him a guitar. It wasn't sleek, it was a shabby, inexpensive instrument that they could hardly afford, but the instant Willie picked it up, something clicked. By age 7, he was writing songs. His first was likely a small gospel song, something easy, not the refined, pretty paper, that arrived many years later in 1963. But even then, music was his source of sustenance. By the time he was 10, Willie was gigging in local taverns, making more than grown men picking cotton from dawn till dusk. This small boy in baggy overalls was a musical child genius. But at home, life was strict and involved. His grandmother, Nancy, was a devout woman. She attended the Methodist Church of Abbott, a church that had been established since 1899. She did not allow dancing, deeming it to be a sin. Each Sunday, Willie sang in the choir and was as good as a church boy could look. But on the sly, he was stealing beers and smoking cigarettes, afraid that his grandmother's hot hellfire sermons would get the best of him someday. While she prayed, he tuned into Bob Wills and his Texas Playboys on the radio, music she would have deemed the devil's work. In a turn of events many years after, Willie purchased the very same Abbott church to prevent it from closing down. But prior to those preservation days, there was heartbreak that sliced deeper than ever before. In 1939, when Willie was merely 6 years old, his grandfather Alfred, his father figure, his instructor, and the person who had presented him with that guitar, passed away due to pneumonia. It was as if losing the sun from his little world. Life only got tougher after that. He had to rise early enough to milk cows prior to school and labor long hours just to enable his family to survive. The agony etched something indelible on him, igniting the spirit of independence and outlawry that would chart his professional life. By 1950, age 17, Willie had graduated from high school and entered the U.S. Air Force. He desired to serve his nation, but after 9 months, his back ruptured from moving heavy equipment. The injury was so bad he was medically discharged. Having lost his dream of being in the military, he returned to music. In 1956, he left for Vancouver, Washington, and became a radio DJ at KVAN. He cut his first single, No Place for Me, with Lumberjack on the flip side. Undeterred, he even started his own label, Willie Nelson Records, and sold the records and signed photos for $1 each. Starday Records wouldn't release his material, but Willie didn't quit. He sold 3,000 personally, working the circuits through his radio show. However, cash was uncomfortably tight. He washed dishes, worked late nights, and even sold vacuum cleaners and Bibles to put food on the table for his family. He tried out to get on the Ozark Jubilee but was rejected. Life was hard, but each disappointment seeped into his songs, infusing them with pain and hard edges no Nashville gloss could simulate. In Fort Worth, he started playing in crazy honky-tonk clubs, where each night dissolved into fistfights. In order to defend himself, he hired drummer Paul English, who appeared threatening with his devilish goatee and brought guns, to play with him. Willie himself would sometimes fight when drunken strangers attempted to instruct him on what to play. But those evenings toughened him up, taught him how to control a crowd and how to make it in an industry that consumed the weak. And then there was the day that crushed his heart but altered his course. In 1959, penniless and on the verge of eviction, he sold a tune titled Family Bible for $50. It was a huge hit for another performer. At about the same time, he sold Nightlife for $150, a song that would bring millions later to others. He learned the toughest lesson of his life: always retain your songs. That lesson would ultimately make him rich and self-sufficient. By 1960, Willie was in Nashville. He was almost 30 years old, penniless, and sometimes slept in his automobile. One night, on a snow night, he parked his car and slept in the snow, prepared to quit and die. A friend rescued him just in time. Shortly afterward, songwriter Harlan Howard listened to his songs at Tootsie's Orchid Lounge and persuaded Pamper Music to sign Willie for $50 a week. That check paid for his survival. In 1961, he penned Crazy for Patsy Cline. She despised it at first, but when she performed it, it was her biggest single and a crossover anthem. The recording solidified Willie's fame, but the paydays went largely into the record label's coffers. This betrayal fueled his disdain for Nashville's stiff system. He desired control, autonomy, and truth in his music, and Nashville craved homogeny. By the 1970s, disillusioned with the industry, he made the move back to Texas, where he fell into the counterculture of Austin. Hippies, cowboys, and outlaws congregated at clubs such as the Armadillo World Headquarters, and Willie fit in instantly. He wrote the lyrics to Shotgun Willie in 1973 on a box of sanitary pads in a hotel bathroom. The album that resulted bombed nationally but was a hometown Austin hit. Outlaw Country was born. 2 years later, on a $4,000 budget, he recorded Red-Headed Stranger. The record company loathed it and characterized it as a bunch of demos, but Willie would not let them change anything. The album went multi-platinum, and Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain, his first #1 single and first Grammy. He had defeated the Nashville machine on his own terms. After that, Willie's own history turned to both success and tragedy: outlaw country fame with Waylon Jennings, run-ins with the law, collapsing lungs, IRS scandals, and personal tragedies, including suicide by his son Billy in 1991. He reinvented himself time and time again, playing roles in movies like The Electric Horseman, co-founding Farm Aid with Neil Young and John Mellencamp, recording everything from jazz standards to rap tracks with Snoop Dogg, and taking home Grammys into his 80s. Alongside it all, his wife Annie D'Angelo was with him, assisting him in quitting drinking and overcoming close calls for death, including a harrowing case of COVID-19 at the age of 89. There was, however, Kris Kristofferson behind all the survival. When they first met as outsiders in Nashville, Willie saw something in Kris. In 1971, Willie sang Kris's song Me and Bobby McGee. In 1979, he recorded a whole album of Kristofferson's work. They co-starred together in Songwriter in 1984, speaking the truth about their hardships in fiction. With Johnny Cash and Waylon Jennings, they created the Highwaymen in 1985, a group that dominated the charts. Willie always credited Kris with making him courageous enough to be different. When Kris started losing his memory in 2009, the doctors believed that it was dementia. Years went by, and they found out it was Lyme disease. Kris recovered with treatment, and Willie never gave up on him, traveling to Hawaii, motivating him, and singing with him even when Kris could hardly remember the lyrics. But in September 2024, Kris Kristofferson passed away. For Willie, who had already lost Waylon in 2002 and Johnny Cash in 2003, this was the final blow. He was the last highwayman standing. In subsequent interviews, his sorrow overflowed. "I hated to lose him," Willie confessed, the words plain but weighed with a lifetime of unuttered love and respect. He revealed something he had never uttered before: Kristofferson's music had rescued him. "Sunday morning coming down, for the good times, help me make it through the night, me and Bobby McGee," these were his salvation when he thought he could not continue. He referred to Kris as the best writer who ever lived, but too late. Willie confessed that he despised himself for never letting Kris know all those things while he was alive. At the end of 6 decades of music, after a life of poverty, outlaw heroism, IRS fiascos, lung collapses, family loss, charity victories, Grammys, and reinventions, Willie Nelson was still lugging around regrets. The hardest outlaw of them all remained, in essence, a man who had lost too many and spoke too little when it really counted. That is the tale of Willie Nelson, the Abbott boy who weathered abandonment, the outlaw who sabotaged Nashville, the icon who duet with Snoop Dogg, the survivor who lived to see nearly everyone else die off, and the man who finally acknowledged that Kris